In 6-2, properties of parallelograms, we're going to learn a lot of properties of these parallelograms and apply them to find missing side lengths or missing angles, etc. So the first thing you need to know is the definition of a parallelogram. Definition of a parallelogram states that that it is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. Remember, a quadrilateral is a four-sided figure, and it has two pairs of parallel sides as shown in the drawing. Remember, parallel lines are marked with the arrows. So our first property of a parallelogram is right here. It says, if we have a parallelogram, then, this arrow is like an if-then. So if we have a parallelogram, then the opposite sides are congruent. So that means that I could mark up my figure of AB being congruent to CD and BC being congruent to AD. Okay, my second property states, if we have a parallelogram, then our opposite angles are congruent. So I'll show you what those will look like. Opposite angles being congruent would be like angle A is congruent to angle C, and then I'll put two lines for angle B being congruent to angle D. Our third property states that if we have a parallelogram, then the consecutive angles are supplementary. Consecutive angles would be angles that are right next to each other. For instance, angle A and D are supplementary, or angle A and B are supplementary. And supplementary means that they add to 180. So measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B is equal to 180 degrees. And our last property says, if we have a parallelogram, then the diagonals bisect each other. So diagonals AC and diagonals BD, I'll draw those in, would bisect each other. They're going to make congruent segments. Let me mark that up for you. As you can see, I've marked my congruent segments. So if I added in a letter such as E in the middle here, this middle point, BE is now congruent to ED, and CE is now congruent to AE, due to the diagonals bisecting each other. So since LM is 28 inches, the side opposite, since it's a parallelogram, is congruent to that. So KN is also 28 inches. The diagonal LN is 26 inches. Since we know that diagonals bisect each other, that would mean that LO is congruent to ON. And so if they add to 26 inches, they have to be 13 inches each. You would cut that in half. Since opposite angles are congruent in a parallelogram, LKN right here is 74 degrees, so LMN, the opposite angle, is also 74 degrees. Angle MML, sorry, 74 degrees. In a parallelogram, diagonals bisect each other, so we know that FJ is congruent to JH, and JG is congruent to EJ. And so we can set equations equal to each other, like 4z minus 9 equals 2z, and solve that. So I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to give you the answers to 2A and 2B based on that information, see if you can get them correct. So I found that Z was 4.5, and I plugged that back in to get JH and FJ equal to 9. Then I went over and I wrote my other equation, 3W equals W plus 8, and I solved for W equals 4. I plugged W back in, and I got that EJ is 12 and JG is 12. And so now I can answer my question. So it asked the length of JG, well, I just said that that was 12. And FH. FH is the full diagonal. Since each part was 9, which I calculated on the right, each part was 9, then the full diagonal would be 18. So in a parallelogram PQRS, I have my P, Q, I'm missing my R, it's probably going to be somewhere up around this area, P, Q, R, and then S. So in order to find this, since parallelograms have opposite sides being parallel, remember back from algebra that parallel means they have the same slope. or the same rise over run. So I'm going to check the rise over run on PQ. So I'm rising 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over 2. So I'm going to do the same thing for S, up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over 2. So it's a little bit off, but that is where R is based on the slope. So in order to find the missing coordinate, you're going to find the rise over run of the opposite side and then use that to find where the coordinate would belong. You can draw it in, you can complete your parallelograms, sort of like you can check your work too. We can also make sure that Q to R is now parallel to PS as well.